Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this video, and welcome back to a new episode of At the Time of this recording. And we are doing a album ranking episode with the discography of Marillion. The gregarious Scotsman Fish would be on the vocals, the guitars done by Steve Rothery, the bass played by Pete Truavis, the keyboards with Mark Kelly, and Ian Mosley on the drums, who would replace Mick Pointer after their debut was released. A period of uncertainty followed after Fish's departure, as he chose to pursue a solo career, but they had reinvented themselves with Steve Hogarth on the vocals. The lineup has stayed the same ever since, breaking new ground with each subsequent album, creating incredible live shows, and having a deep connection with their fans. So much so that fan clubs are based all over the world, and people will travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles to see them. My relationship with the band started with my dad. I was introduced to Kaylee, which was on an 80s compilation of ballads, and my sister was almost named after the song before settling on another name. Kind of like how I discovered Dream Theater, I was made aware of the Hogarth era thanks to the Genius program on iTunes. I couldn't believe it was the same band, and I fell in love with this direction and have seen them since 6 times, including seeing them at their well-known Marillion weekend in Leicester last year. And I also have a Marillion lyric tattooed on my arm, which is this one here. No one leaves you when you live in their heart and mind. With all that said, let's go. Comfortably in last place, we have Marillion's 14th album, Somewhere Else, released in 2007. It's at the bottom. It's not a bad album by any means. It's just not particularly memorable. I don't think there is a single song apart from the title track, which in itself is absolutely fantastic, but I come back to regularly. When you consider how incredible the albums that came before and after this, with their intensity, storytelling, fascinating arrangements, and their sort of theatrics, Somewhere Else doesn't really tick any of these boxes. They've adopted more of an arena rock sound on this album compared with some of the more experimental, progressive leaning predecessors. They had been known to create albums which are kind of an opposite reaction to the album that came before. So if they followed this same pattern with this album, then yes, they succeeded admirably, but just not to necessarily good or interesting effect. Don't get me wrong, I love it when bands release albums which are different, and it keeps the band chemistry exciting and gets fans talking. So please don't think I'm having a dig at this album because it's different to their previous work. It's just that I didn't connect with this one anywhere near as much as their other albums. Next up, we have the double disc Happiness is the Road, released in 2008. So it was only a year after Somewhere Else came out. Overall, the album is a much more experimental one compared with Somewhere Else, and there are some truly brilliant songs on here. The first disc of the two is titled Essence, and is a loosely based sort of concept album about the discovering of the meaning of your life, which is essentially the crux of the title track of that disc. The title track of the album, Happiness is the Road, meanwhile, is an autobiographical tale of Steve Hogarth having a medical emergency and has had a bit of a philosophical enlightenment after his appointment and eventual surgery for said medical emergency. The compositions on disc 1 are much more gentle and delicate overall, with songs such as This Train Is My Life, the instrumental intermission Liquidity, and Trap for Spark showing their more sensitive side, whereas on disc 2, with the more experimental side, songs such as Thunderfly, Especially True, and Whatever Is Wrong With You being much more sort of on the sort of rock side of the spectrum. The sprawling The Man from the Planet Marzipan and Asylum Satellite 1 showing off their more proggy inclinations. The highlights for me from the album across both sides are This Train Is My Life, Essence, Wrapped Up in Time, and Real Tears for Sale. It's full of hidden gems. It's far from perfect, hence why it's sort of lower down on the list, but certainly worth checking out. Released in 1999, we have their 11th studio album, Marillion.com. This album will also be the name of their website, which made finding this album online hilariously frustrating. We have on this album, for the most part, a collection of some fantastically produced and accessible shorter songs, the likes of Go, Enlightened, and Tumble Down the Years being especially memorable, with Deserve and Rich being on the slightly cheesier side, but still an awful lot of fun to listen to. And of course, I can't talk about this album without talking about one of their least rated songs in Built In Bastard Radar, which has been listed in various forums as one of their worst ever songs. I think that prize is a little bit harsh, but I do understand why. The mix of shorter songs build up to the two epic tracks. We have the multifaceted, deeply underrated 15-minute Interior Lulu and the trip hop inspired 10-minute long House. The highlights for me on this album are Go, Enlightened, Tumble Down the Years, and Interior Lulu. It is one of their least discussed albums in their catalogue, and it's definitely one to check out if you are a little bit more new to the Hogarth era, or if you're simply looking for a more accessible side to this band. Released in 2012, we have the band's 16th album, Sounds That Can't Be Made. What you will notice within the first 30 seconds is that the production is much more loud than what they had previously put out. The strings on the opening track, Gaza, are captivating and intensely played in 7/4 timing. The song itself tells from the story of a young child living in the territory. The Gaza situation, as we all know, has been ongoing for decades, and it shows no sign of ending anytime soon. The song is a musical journey, taking many left turns in its 17.5-minute runtime, sung passionately by Hogarth. The closing solo by Steve Rothery is one of my absolute favourites from him as well. We are then followed by the title track with its synth-led drive and a closing keyboard solo almost in the style of Richard Wright from Pink Floyd, and of course another epic solo by Steve Rothery. The more accessible tracks on the album, such as Pour My Love, Power, and Invisible Ink, show the more succinct side to the band in this more intensely produced album. The closing track, The Sky Above the Rain, is, in my opinion, one of their most heartbreaking songs in their discography. It's one of the very few breakup songs that make me well up. But the reason why the album is down here, in spite of all this praise, is that the album is let down severely by a couple of tracks. The 14-minute midsection Montreal is, for Marillion standards, not very good. In fact, throughout a lot of the song, it's quite boring. As well, Lucky Man is just so cliche and it's simply uninteresting. So it's an album with the best and the worst that the band has to offer in terms of tracks. So the highlights for me on this album are Gaza, Sounds That Can't Be Made, Power, and The Sky Above the Rain. So yeah, if you are looking for something on the sort of the heavier side of their discography, then yeah, this would be the one to check out for sure. Released in 1981, we have the band's debut, Script for a Jester's Tear, and this will be the first on the list with Fish on the mic. I can now see the gatekeepers of the Marillion community shunning me for all eternity for any live show and coming out in their droves to Chippenham with their pitchforks out. The main reason why I've put the album this far down is because it just feels too much like a Peter Gabriel era Genesis album. It feels like something from like 1972 or something like that, from like the Nursery Crime era. I don't have a problem with that, but when I'm talking about a Peter Gabriel era Genesis album, fortunately, subsequent Fish era albums wouldn't have quite the same issue. But nonetheless, there are some real bangers here on this album. You've got the likes of the title track, Script for a Jester's Tear, The Web, Chelsea Monday, and of course Garden Party, which is a real life favourite. If you are sort of somewhat new to the band and you want to sort of get an idea of where they come from, then yeah, obviously this would be one to check out. Released in 1999, we have the band's 10th album, Radiation. The songs on this album are as experimental as ever, with a more rock-orientated sound on the likes of Under the Sun, The Answering Machine, and Cathedral Wall. And you've got arena fillers such as live favourite 3 Minute Boy and These Chains. You have the gentler side to their sound with the likes of Born to Run and Now She'll Never Know, and the progressive side with the closing track and the very underrated A Few Words for the Dead. This song in particular is one of their very, very best epic songs, haunting and gradual in the beginning before the band explode with a harder rock sound at the end. So why does it rate down here? It's quite simple. The production. It sounds horrific. So much so that the remix version of the album was available not too long afterwards. The album with these tweaks sound absolutely superb, and no doubt sounding the way the band wanted it to in the first place. These alterations also allow the songs to really shine with much more clarity and less of the lo-fi and fuzzy sound from the original mix. In fact, the remix version is the only one I actually listened to as a result. The highlights for me from this album are 3-Minute Boy, These Chains, Cathedral Wall, and A Few Words for the Dead. If you are looking for something a little bit more experimental, then yes, absolutely check this one out. Next up, we have the album that came before Radiation, This Strange Engine. The easiest way to describe it is that it is an absolute carnival of sound and one of the most diverse albums in their career. The opening track, Man of a Thousand Faces, right off the bat is an adventure in itself. The guitars are essentially purely acoustic, so a lot of the vibe shifts are done by Mark Kelly with the organ and the piano leading the way, before climaxing with a sort of gospel-styled coda. They dialed things back a bit for the next couple of tracks with the delightful One Fine Day, and their lowest ranked chart entry, the feel-good musically yet bittersweet lyrically, 80 Days. None of these tracks are particularly world-beating songs for Marillion standards. However, if you stick with the album, you will be rewarded greatly, because next up is the phenomenal Estonia. Written about the shipping disaster of the same name, it was written by Hogarth following his visit to see the only British survivor of the wreckage. It is a brooding and deeply profound song about mortality, and the lyric, "No one leads you when you live in their heart and mind," is one of their very best, and that is the lyric that I have indelibly marked on me. The tracks afterwards fizzle out slightly with the likes of Memory of Water and An Accidental Man. I mean, they're okay. Then we get to the utterly ridiculous Hope for the Future, which has more key changes than a locksmith gets through on a daily basis, before we reach the climax of the title track. The sprawling 15-minute ode Hogarth wrote about his dad from his beginnings to his life in the Navy and raising his family in a working class community. The musical shifts in the song are at times very abrupt and jarring, but nonetheless has become a staple of their live shows. And that guitar solo after Hogarth sings On the Horizon is, in my opinion, Rothery's very best solo. So yeah, the highlights for me on this album are Man of a Thousand Faces, One Fine Day, Estonia, and This Strange Engine, the title track. So yeah, again, if you're more interested in the slightly more experimental side of their discography, it is certainly one to check out. Our challenge to you is to firstly listen to the album, then write a review without using any of the following words: progressive rock, Genesis, Fish, heavy metal, dinosaurs, predictable, concept album. Because if you do, we'll know that you haven't listened to it. That was the statement Marillion put out in anticipation of their 11th album, Anarachnophobia. So, let's have a bit of fun here. Let's review the album using this statement, but I'm actually going to do it by using all of these words. Keeping track? Good. This certainly is a statement album by the band, who, even though they had thrown off the shackles of being synonymous with Fish, there are certainly some who still latch onto this era. And this is not your typical progressive rock record. So if you were hoping for a Genesis-style album or concept album, this is not for you. And it certainly isn't a heavy metal one. It's bold, it's daring, and certainly not predictable. Bearing in mind that this had come off the release of Marillion.com, so it is clear to see that these guys were not dinosaurs or a legacy act. This is an incredibly colourful and inventive album. The anthemic Between You and Me and the bass-led 9-minute Journey of Quartz are both excellent tracks, and the likes of Map of the World and Separated Out show off their more radio-friendly side, whilst the likes of When I Meet God This is the 21st century, and if my heart were a ball, it would roll uphill, clocking in at just under 10 minutes, showcase their more epic side. The highlights for me on the album are Between You and Me, Quartz, When I Meet God, and This is the 21st Century. It is a fascinating album, and if you are really not too familiar with the Hogarth era, this really does capsulate so much of what the band can do and how good they are at what they do. Coming in next, we have Marillion's sixth album, Holidays in Eden, and this would be Hogarth's second album with the band. And the sound of this probably would have mortified many Marillion fans at the time, as they had adopted a more commercial sounding album with very little suggestion of any leanings towards their more typical progressive elements. That being said, the songs are remarkable in their strength and can they really hold their own. I think if an up and coming band had released this, or if it was the same band under another name, as per Hogarth's original thoughts when he joined the band, it would have been much lauded and would have been a lot more commercially successful. This album, I feel, contains some of Hogarth's very best vocal performances to date. His ability to tell a story or convey an emotion has always been his strengths. The likes of Cover My Eyes, Dry Land, and Waiting to Happen showcase his power and range so well. And Rothery's distinctive delay-laden cleans and his soaring solos complement the atmosphere brilliantly. And when he enters the opening track, Splintering Heart, with a screaming solo, it is a goosebump-inducing moment. We also have some really catchy blues on This Town, before it then transitions into the mysterious The Rake's Progress and the closing track 100 Nights. I also have to give a very special mention to No One Can, as that song was played at our wedding as we left the registry office. Yes, believe it or not, that was a request that I made. What a shock. The highlights for me on the album are Splintering Heart, No One Can, Dry Land, and 100 Nights. If you are looking for something a little bit more accessible in their discography, then yes, this would be a really good place to start. Released in 2022, we have what is, at the time of this recording, Marillion's most recent release, An Hour Before It's Dark. It was recorded during the COVID-19 lockdown period, and with Steve Rothery abstaining from visiting the studio due to underlying health issues, so he wrote his parts from home. Following the incredibly intense Fear that was released 6 years before, this was a long time in the making and would actually be the longest gap the band would take between albums. Whilst the foreboding environment is no longer felt, it is an album of its time, which in the early 2020s was, putting it very mildly, difficult and challenging. According to the Making of documentary, they were wanting to not write an album or themes relating to the pandemic, but given its worldwide impact, Hogarth relented that it did seep into the lyrics. And this would be apparent, especially in elements of the songs Reprogram the Gene, Murder Machines, and the multi-section closing track Care, the final section of which Hogarth tributes the healthcare workers and those on the front line during the height of the pandemic, and calling them angels on earth. For me, however, the best song on the album is The Crow and the Nightingale. It is one of the shorter songs on the album, yes, but it is such a beautiful song. It's a testament to Leonard Cohen, one of Hogarth's biggest influences. The song has such a majestic quality about it, enhanced by the guest feature of the Choir Noir, who are a contemporary vocal choir who add this otherworldly vibe, especially towards the end. The album, in spite of its epic feel, does have its weak spots. The penultimate track, Sierra Leone, is easily the worst on the album. The story of a diamond miner hitting the jackpot by finding a massive diamond but refusing to sell it is an interesting one, but not very well executed for their standards. The lyrics just feel a little bit shoehorned in, and the More Than Treasure section gets incredibly repetitive and boring very, very quickly. Also, the way that all but 2 of the songs have been split up into smaller chunks on streaming platforms means that you can't just listen to, say, Be Hard on Yourself, or Reprogram the Gene, or Care. Because of this, I can't add the song to a playlist. You have to add all the individual sections if you wanted to do that. Also, I feel that the songs are cohesive enough to eliminate the way they've formatted it anyway. My favourites from the album are Be Hard on Yourself, Reprogram the Gene, The Crow and the Nightingale, and Care. So yeah, if this is a sign of things to come for the band, then yes, I'm very excited to see what they come up with next. But it would be interesting to see how well they do if they do an album of shorter songs instead of epics. Released 10 years ago this year, we had the band's 17th album, Fear, or if you want to abbreviate it, Everyone and Run. It is an album written during a period of turmoil in the UK in the lead up to Brexit, and as such, the album is without doubt the most political they have done. Hogarth has also said that the album was one of foreboding and menace, and unfortunately, it would become prophetic in a number of ways, with corruption, racism, greed, class warfare, and intolerance running rampant in the First World. El Dorado and The New Kings are the bookends to the album and are linked in terms of the multifaceted subject matter, with Hogarth uncompromising his delivery and writing. It's angry yet mournful at the same time, frustrated that the way to make it in the world depends on your status, your wealth, and your connections, yet resigned to acceptance that that is simply the way the system is built to work by those in charge. The title of the album comes from a lyric in The New Kings, again, not sung in anger, but almost as a lament. Politics aside, we have a bit of a message of unity with the kind of title track, Living in Fear, the trials, tribulations, sacrifices, as well as the absolute joy the band have choosing the touring lifestyle in The Leavers. And I think, again, the political connections there are no coincidence with the title of that track, with the band being called The Leavers, well, they leave to go on tour, and the Remainers are those who stay at home and wait for the band to return to their homes. The opening keyboard intro to The Leavers is among my absolute favourite Mark Kelly moments, whilst the closing section of The Leavers, One Tonight, is such a majestic ending and induces goosebumps every single time I listen to it, and especially when the closing solo from Rothery kicks in. To sum up, it is a very heavy album in terms of the content, so it's certainly not for everyday listening or for casual listening, and people of certain political inclinations will automatically hate it because of the views that Hogarth puts on display on this album. I, for one, personally applaud them for having the balls to be this brazen about their political views at this point in their career. I mean, if you've gone this far making it as a touring act, then, why not be brazen about how you feel? Wear your heart on your sleeve. But yeah, I would say that the highlights from this album are the El Dorado, and you've got Living in Fear, The Leavers, and The New Kings. It is a superb album. If you are in the mood for something a little bit more intense, then yes, definitely go with this one. Released in 1984, we have Marillion's second album, and the first featuring drummer Ian Mosley in Fugazi. It is a delightfully quirky album, such fun, playful, but it also has a lot of emotion and darkness throughout. The songwriting and the performances from Fish's hymn is most unhinged and mysterious, which explains why Hogarth has never performed any of these songs live before. Correct me if I'm wrong, please let me know. And as for the title, Fugazi is actually an acronym, meaning up, got ambushed, zipped in. The album opener, Assassin, is highly enjoyable, with the James Bond-esque guitar lick appropriately pairing with the sort of espionage-themed lyrics. Punch and Judy, with the bright analog synth opening and its shorter length, show the beginnings of a somewhat more accessible side, whereas the weird and wonderful side of the band are in force from this point on, with the likes of Jigsaw, with, of course, a phenomenal solo by Steve Rothery. I mean, what else can you expect? Emerald Lies, She Chameleon, with its really dark, slow-burning sort of composition. And then you've got the two climaxes with the 8-minute Fugazi and the 8-minute Incubus. So yeah, the highlights for me on this album are Assassin, Jigsaw, She Chameleon, and Fugazi. It is a very odd album, and I love it for that. If you are sort of wanting to learn a little bit more about the Fish era, then yeah, this is definitely him at his most Fish. Released in 1989, this would be the album that unveiled Hogarth as the new singer of Marillion. We have the fifth album, Season's End. Hogarth himself is still jokingly referred to as the new singer by the man himself on occasion. Musically, despite how Hogarth sounds in compared to Fish, which is chalk and cheese really, it isn't too far removed from what we have heard from, say, Clutching at Straws. But Hogarth's vocals transform the band into an entirely different sounding act. I often wonder how fans of the band back in the 80s thought, going from one distinctive and charismatic frontman in Fish to another with a completely different style, and it would have been quite unsettling to some, I would imagine. The opening track, King of Sunset Town, goes off like a firework with one of Rothery's trademark solos after a sort of a very slow build-up, and it is an incredible way to open the album, in my opinion one of their strongest opening tracks. Hogarth's powerful vocals steal the show, and you've got the fan favourite with Easter, which comes immediately after, which showcases a much more sort of straightforward sound, played on a 12-string acoustic, and then of course you've got the second half of the song with a very proggy 5/4 sounding second half. And it does show the audience that, yep, they're still here and they're still prog. There is also an air of fun and lightheartedness with the likes of The Uninvited Guest and Hooks in You being breaths of fresh air and the perfect tonic to the more intense compositions. Of course, you've got The King of Sunset Town, but other songs that would sort of meet the brief of being the sort of the balls of the album, if you want to call it that, rather crudely put, I should say, are the likes of the title track, Season's End, Berlin, and The Space, the latter of which is the closing track, and it is an exceptional song. That high that Hogarth sings towards the end of the song, I'm getting goosebumps just by talking about it already. So yeah, across the board, it's full of incredible moments and brilliant songwriting. But my favourites from the album are The King of Sunset Town, Season's End, Holloway Girl, and The Space. This is where the Hogarth era began, so it is definitely worth checking out if you wanted to sort of figure out where they went from here. Released in 2004, we have Marbles. This would be the band's first double album. These guys have always been ambitious, and this one has to be right up there with the most ambitious of their works to date. Released after 2001's highly experimental Anarachnophobia, this album would showcase the band's proclivity to push their boundaries and continue to experiment with their distinctive brand of neo-prog. The epic opener, The Invisible Man, is 13.5 minutes of one of their finest ever compositions, a cinematic journey into the world of an anonymous character who longs to be seen by the outside world. It plays out like a short film with alternating shifts in mood with delicate sonic textures and powerful keys and guitars interspersed throughout. The first disc ends with the 18-minute odyssey in Ocean Cloud, if you pardon the pun, which was written about Don Allen, who became the first person to row the Atlantic in both directions. The song, Ocean Cloud, also features radio transmissions of him talking about the experience. And you've got Neverland, which closes the album, so this end of the second disc, which is a beautiful love song with heartfelt and emotionally driven lyrics. Combining this with Rothery's soaring guitar solos, it never fails to hit me right in the feels. The 10+ minute songs are balanced out by a diverse mix of shorter songs, with the likes of Genie showing their sort of more playful side, The Only Unforgivable Thing, which was written in the wake of Steve Hogarth's divorce, Fantastic Place, which is an amazing song, I love that one so much, and the single You're Gone, which actually surprisingly broke into the top 10 in the UK charts. These songs are particular highlights to me, and they show their knack for creating incredibly well-arranged songs that wouldn't sound too out of place in a sold-out arena. There are a couple of weak spots with the likes of Drilling Holes, which is one of my least favourite songs in their discography, and Don't Hurt Yourself. But as well, as much as I love Neverland, I find the closing section drags on a little bit. But these are relatively meaningless when you consider the grandeur and the artistry elsewhere on the album. My favourites from it are The Invisible Man, Fantastic Place, Ocean Cloud, and Neverland. If you want the best of what the Hogarth era has to offer, then this would be the album to start with. Next up, we have Misplaced Childhood, released in 1985, and this would be the album that would be synonymous with the band. Apparently inspired by an acid trip from Fish, The album takes us through a journey of a number of themes, apparently sparked by a painful breakup involving Fish and a woman, whose name, Kay Lee, would be synonymous with the band from this point onwards. Themes of innocence are also core to the album, both on a personal level, with songs such as Lavender, inspired directly by a 17th century nursery rhyme, and the penultimate track, Childhood's End, as well as in a societal way, if you want to call it that, with innocence and war being a frequent theme. Songs such as Blind Curve and White Feather would be mostly or entirely war based. Other themes would also harken back to Fisher's Scottish roots, especially on Bittersweet, with some bleak poetry and sexual liaisons on the menu, and National Pride with Heart of Lothian, a delightful mix of prog and anthemic rock. It's this blend that makes it an album I come back to regularly. It's highly enjoyable, and it doesn't sound too much of either the 70s or the 80s for it to sound out of place for its time. The shifting themes somehow combine to make what is a seamless concept album, a phrase which in 1985 the majority of pop music fans at that time thought was long gone, but Marillion were an anomaly, and over 40 years later they continue to wear that as a badge of honour. My favourite tracks from Misplaced Childhood are Kaylee, Bittersweet, Heart of Lothian, and Childhood's End. This is the Fish album from this band. So if you wanted to rediscover some classics, or if you wanted to explore some of their sort of deeper cuts from the Fish era, then yes, definitely check this album out. Number 3, we have Afraid of Sunlight. This is Marillion's 8th album, and my god, it is sublime. While not a concept album, the tracks do have a running theme, which is essentially the downfall of celebrity and the constant scrutiny that one receives for being a household name. The notable exception to this is the much maligned but fun 60s throwback Cannibal Surf Babe, one of few that Rothery actually plays a baritone guitar on. Back on point, there have been plenty of celebrities who have gone down in history for a live fast, die young philosophy, as well as those who keep pressing the self-destruct button. It's this fascination with bad news and downward spirals that also becomes central to the album's theme. The album starts with the jangling 6/4 on a 12 string with Gazpacho, a song about a struggling boxer. I think it's referring to Sonny Liston, but I'm sure I'll be corrected in the comments if that's wrong. You've got the likes of Beautiful, which is a bittersweet ballad about the fleeting life of celebrity. The line, the leaves turn from red to brown to be trodden down, would support this interpretation. Also, that you would have one shot in life, so why not stand up and be beautiful? If you enjoyed the first half of the album, brace yourself for the second half. This is all about the back end. The mournful Out of This World is a stunning track, written about Donald Campbell's ill-fated attempt at breaking his own speed record on water. The machine, the Bluebird, and her owner would be unveiled from Coniston Water, partly in thanks to this song. And the solo is again one of many incredible moments from Steve Rothery. Following Out of This World, you have the title track, which is equally stunning. It builds up slow before an explosion in the emotion. The solo played this time by Mark Kelly. The closing tracks Beyond You and King complete a run of tracks which I feel is one of the best closing sequences to any album that I know of. The pressure cooker ending of King before it's sudden cut out always takes my breath away. So there is so much to unpack with this album, and it is superb. My highlights from it are Gazpacho, Out of This World, Afraid of Sunlight, and King. Definitely worth checking out, and it is one of their more sort of least discussed albums, I feel. The 90s were a bit of a weird time for the band, but this album for sure is exceptional, so it's definitely worth checking out. Released in 1987, we have the band's 4th album, and the band's last with Fish, in Clutching at Straws. It is another concept album, this time a semi-autobiographical tale relating to Fish's struggle with drinks, drugs, and the spotlight. The character in the album is called Torch, and gone are the fantastical theatrics and imagery of their previous albums with Fish, and we get a view into the world of alcohol and the seedy underbelly of the town. The incredible triple header of Hotel Hobbies, Warm Wet Circles, and At That Time of the Night is a remarkable opening run of tracks, whereas Afraid of Sunlight, I feel, has some of the strongest second halves of their catalogue. Clutching at Straws begins with a sort of similar description in their opening sequence. Warm Wet Circles in particular is exceptional, with a quintessentially jangly, clean guitar intro before Fish goes into overdrive with his vivid descriptions of the underbelly of the night out. From what you could gather from what I've said before, the instrumentation overall feels a lot less playful than what we've heard from the band previously. It's a lot more serious, and this could be indicative of the band dynamic at the time, with tensions running high and would lead eventually to Fish leaving the band not too long afterwards. Songs such as Going Under, Torch Song, and Sugar Mice show this more somber side to the band, but none of these songs lose their allure from all of the personal struggles the band were going through at the time, especially Sugar Mice. Whereas songs such as White Russian, Slanch and Math, and The Short Straw show off their more grandiose and pomp that we all love from this era, but with an air of gloom running through. Most distinct light in the shade is the single Incommunicado, with its bouncy arrangement and catchy Moog intro and a much more conventional song structure. Whilst this is a stylistic shift and it is a little bit jarring, it is very welcome, and it certainly doesn't sound out of place in the album. The highlights for me on the album are Hotel Hobbies, Warm Wet Circles, Slanch and Math, and The Last Straw. It is an amazing album, and what a sign-off for the Fish era. If you want the best of his material, then yes, this would be the one to listen to. At last, we hit number 1, and I'm just as relieved as you. This would be the band's 7th album, released in 1995, Brave. And I believe it is the band's magnum opus. It tells of a story that Steve Hogarth read about the telling of a young girl found on the Severn Bridge, and had no idea who she was or how she got there. Hogarth then decided to write a fictional story about how she came to be. It is a dark, brooding album that requires your full time and attention. It is best enjoyed as a whole in one sitting, rather than as individual tracks. Needless to say, it is a grower, and repeated listens are a must. It took me a long time to really understand and appreciate the album as a whole. Themes of sexual abuse, suicide, and isolation are prevalent, and it becomes core to the atmosphere and the themes. The recording of the album definitely would have had an impact on the overall vibe of the album, recorded in Marillion Castle in France, in order to create a unique ambience and to sort of help get back to their progressive roots. They would even use the sounds of nature recorded in real time to create a very organic sound. So with all this in mind, what does the album actually sound like? Well, we have all the elements you could want from a Marillion album from any era. You have the progressive elements with the likes of Living with the Big Lie, Alone Again in the Lap of Luxury, the Goodbye to All That, and The Great Escape, the latter of which I am saying now as my favourite Robbie solo. The accessible, poppier sounds with the likes of Hard as Love and Paper Lies are a welcome relief to the tension, and the downright devastating with the likes of Hollow Man and the title track with its mournful bagpipes in the intro, which always gives me shivers. The closing track, Made Again, feels like the end of a great film. It's appropriately a very cinematic sounding album, and this song sounds like a scene where all the cast members hang out together to end the credits. It is just so utterly joyful to listen to, and the classical guitar before sort of morphing into this sort of 12-string organ and piano arrangement is just such a joyful conclusion. Never fails to make me smile. So many highlights from this album, but I'm going with Living with the Big Lie, Alone Again in the Lap of Luxury, The Great Escape, and Made Again being my personal highlights. As I said, it is definitely one to listen to as a whole, so if you have time to spare, put some aside, give it an hour, it's about how long the album is, to just sit back, relax, put some headphones on, and immerse yourself into Brave. And there we go. That is the 18 album discography of Marillion. Now, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for sticking around if you got to this point in the video, and I will see you again next time. Bye bye.